Hi everyone, it is a Tuesday night and I've just posted section 11 content tonight, but I wanted to do a little voiceover, so it won't be very long, but I did want to accompany you through the sort of unpacking of that PowerPoint. So here we're going to look, it's a sort of already a standalone unit because you don't really need this for the assignment, but it is, I think, useful to close your reflection around management and leadership. So I think I would recommend that you to spend some time interacting and engaging with the activities and the task, even if it's just from reflection without using references, but still something which it'll be useful, I think, to close off the course. So objectives: examine how easy or complex it is to adhere to a leadership style that is not aligned to your personality trait. In essence, we've talked about a lot of very specific skills and a lot of very specific sort of objectives within certain leadership approaches. What if you don't find that you are aligned in terms of personality with these skills? What do you do? The second point is consider some of the advantages and pitfalls of personality psychometric testing in this area, and I'll explain how this was very popular, and I'm asking you to think whether it should remain popular or not. And the third point is, sorry, explore to what extent personal sphere and professional spheres are and should be distinct. Because an argument that people will often have is that it really doesn't matter what you're like at home, that you should just develop this other personality at work and develop these sort of skills that are required for to develop a certain sort of theoretical and sort of leadership approach. Is that feasible? Is that realistic? And then the last one, explore growth mindset, which one group already looked at in terms of management of change, but I want to bring it back here and see whether it maybe offers us some clues as to move forward when where there's a disalignment between our personality and what we're trying to achieve in terms of leadership. So these are just going to be sort of questions, open questions to lead you to think about it and see if you want to explore further. But my question to start with is, how easy is it to adopt a leadership style that does not coincide with your true personality? So I'd like you to engage in the forum of section 11 and give me your answers to that. I'm looking particularly, for example, with transformational leadership, it becomes very apparent. In terms of transformational leadership, it requires that you are, let me see if I can move this up here. Yeah, that you are inspirational, apt communicator, able to balance interpersonal skills while remaining objective focused, being diversity aware and culture savvy, all very advanced skills. Particularly, people often say you have to be an extrovert to be a transformational leader. So what if you are none of these things? What if you are naturally a great person, and I think you can be a very accomplished sort of worker and researcher, educator, but not be any of these things? Can you still sort of put them on when you go into work? Is it possible to create a mask that is transformational, even if none of these are your true sort of natural default settings in terms of personality? It's an open-ended question. I'm asking how you feel. What sort of effort does this represent? If you're trying to force yourself to do this every day, is it realistic to expect all leaders to gain these skills or to pretend to have them? So just something to think about, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Another thing I wanted to discuss was this notion of psychometric testing. So many of traditional leadership courses would have started by getting you to reflect and to take some tests, so a number of personality tests, and then to work from there, trying to analyze what you feel you are like as a leader. Now, we don't do this anymore, and I certainly don't do it in classrooms anymore, because obviously we moved away from trait leadership approaches, and you've seen that, and you've seen this historical shift. So if we moved away from traits, what's the point of actually looking at what you're like naturally if we're saying that being a leader is not about being yourself naturally? It's actually about being the person that you want to be, and actually, reflectively use the skills that you are developing for very specific goals, relying on very specific literature. So at this stage, is there still an appeal? would you still, submit yourself to personality testing? And you'll find a lot of these online. So if you're interested in doing them, you can do them. And some of them will tell you results such as that the degree to which you are, people focused as opposed to objective focus, or if there's a balance there. There's all sorts of different sort of tests that have been developed by psychology that relate back to leadership. Is it still useful? Is it useful now after the fact, even if we don't believe in traits, in trait leadership? Is it worth looking at how far your natural personality differs from the goals and the skills that we're trying to encourage, for example, with again, transformational leadership, so that you're able to ascertain the work that you have to do and the amount of sort of flexing and sort of growing that you have to do to be able to either be or pretend to be that sort of person. So again, it's an open-ended question, but I think it's worth discussing as we finish the course, to see how you feel and to see how you position yourself now with everything that we've seen on this course, and whether you feel that you would be interested in this, or whether it's something that you feel is irrelevant because really, in essence, it's just a reflective process of growth, and that it doesn't really matter where you start from. It's about where you're going to. So we have two very different possibilities here, and it'll be interesting to see what the group thinks. Then we have this notion of that personal and professional spheres are distinct anyway. So many people will argue back that really the question that I've started with is not pertinent, because really, in essence, you have a private life and you have a professional life, and that therefore you can have two different identities. They don't actually need to be similar. Here, I'm wondering to what extent this is, first of all, cultural, because the first thing that strikes me as I look at this question is that, for example, if you work in the US, you often hear discourse which will say that these two spheres should not be distinct, and that really every effort is made to blend them. And you will see very often things that activities that encourage, especially in terms of leadership, encourage people to bring their families into work and their work into home, and that really, a good leadership is someone who no longer has two different identities in two different spheres, but actually blends this. If you look at a European setting, it's very much the opposite, and leadership, sort of the marketing of leadership hasn't been convincingly, has not convincingly sort of convinced people that there is a need to do that. People are very much adamant that they have two lives, and that these two lives don't need to overlap or cross over. So depending on this, I think, cultural lens, we may feel very differently as to whether, in fact, there's a problem with having a personality at home that's very different from your leadership personality when you walk into work, or whether really, if you look at it from a more North American perspective, whether there is something bad, and whether we should actually be trying to be one and a single and one and the same, as opposed to having these two different spheres. So I let you discuss that and think about that. Again, this week is very sort of open-ended, and I'll be interesting to see what the group sort of talks about and discusses as we finish the course. The last sort of thread of discussion in the forum is about growth mindset. I'm going to suggest that perhaps growth mindset has a solution for us in terms of reconciling, the fact that our personality maybe is a bit different than what specific leadership approaches require, and that it's not so much about just assessing that we are not aligned in terms of natural traits with the traits that we're expecting to see at play in the workplace, but it's actually about working yourself into a mode of development, which means that you are looking ahead as to how you can actually focus on something, which is a set of skills, which, for example, will be transformational, and not have to pretend, but actually grow progressively towards that set of skills. And I have the feeling that growth mindset is providing us some guidance on that. If you are an advocate and you are and see the relevance in this theory, and not everyone does, but it's worth having a look at. So there was a taxonomy that some of you looked at already, and I've given you also 6 links there that will help you sort of explore further. They're not heavy sort of websites, not terribly academic, so it should be fun to just browse through and look at. I would make a parallel there between growth mindset and CBD as well. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, sorry, cognitive behavioral therapy. If you ever have done CBT or interested in CBT, you will see that it's a very simple process by which you ask people to analyze the sort of pitfalls, the sort of reflexes that they have. So you start with their feelings. I'm frustrated because I'm a procrastinator, for example. And then you ask them, but why do you feel that you procrastinate? And so they will often be lucid enough to tell you the patterns of behavior that happens. I get up, I go on a computer, the day goes by, I get very frustrated, I don't do my work, and I go to bed, I'm fairly angry. And so you ask them to then devise a way of going about their day, doing things differently. So analyzing the routines that they have and to think of one or two triggers that could lead them to go through that day in a different way or go through parts of that day in a different way. And then once they do that, you ask them, it's very much fixed in the here and now, so it's very short-term CBT. You ask them to go away and try it and come back, and then to report back as to whether it has led to a different outcome or not. If it leads to a different outcome, then you're simply doing reinforcement, saying, well, you see, you yourself have changed the behavior and you've attained a different outcome. So now can you work backwards and motivate yourself into always going back to this default mode where you are no longer doing things the way you used to, but you're doing it in a new way because you are actually interested and motivated by the outcome that you achieve. It's something very similar between CBT and mindset. They come from different areas because mindset is very much sort of work psychology, workplace psychology, and employment and HR. CBT is more obviously therapeutic. It comes from counseling, but in essence, they describe, I think, a similar process in getting unstuck. And it may be what we need in this discussion that we are closing discussion where we're thinking about what if my personality is here, what if I'm trying to attain this in terms of leadership skills and leadership flavor. So instead of seeing it as two different poles and seeing that, or two different spheres, maybe both CBT and growth mindset shows this as a continuum where we are progressing and trying to change things in order to achieve what we are yearning for. So I will let you explore that, and I look forward to seeing some of your comments. It doesn't have to be by Friday if you're focused on finishing your papers. You can always go back on the weekend or after that, but it would be interesting, even if it's after the end of the course, if we saw you exchange, even during the summer, exchange a few comments on what you, how you feel we can sort of address this remaining issue in terms of really how do you feel as an individual going through this process and trying to put into practice some of the literature that we've discussed through the course. So I'll leave it for now, and I will post another video for section 12, which will be just a wrap up, going back to the outcomes that we had set for ourselves and seeing what and how we've achieved them. So have a good night, and I look forward to reading all your papers. Speak to you soon.